Ciaran, what's the big, either specific or more general topic that you've been grappling with over the last year or so?
Oh, revenue. Let's be brutally honest, we're running a business here and it's hard. Everybody knows that. Anybody who's in radio or in sales across the media knows that it's hard. And I think, if we look at it from an industry perspective, the real challenge that we're seeing is that we as an industry probably have to work harder to really grow our share of the advertising revenue pie in this landscape. And I think if I break that down into three answers and three areas, I look at the area of audience measurement. Advertisers and clients have been calling for a long time in terms of our audience measurement, and I know Adam has particularly strong views on this, but the industry has addressed that area of audience measurement moving to GfK from January of next year. But there's another underlying theme that I don't quite understand is that some clients and advertisers will use the opportunity to say that radio is losing a sort of a loss of relevance, and I don't get that. So we need to understand more where that's coming from, because if you look across all our businesses today, we're on AM, we're on FM, we're on DAB+, we're doing multi-platform integrated briefs back to clients. We're very fast in our responses. The level of ideas is extraordinary in my view in terms of the turnaround time that's expected. And we're doing really strong multi-platform integrated campaigns. So how that issue of loss of relevance is there, I'm not quite sure. So as an industry, we're doing a lot to understand that. And the third point I think we probably need to look at ourselves and as an industry is moving away from sort of age demographic to more sort of looking at the listener and understanding what is really driving the behavioural aspects of the listener, the effect of advertising on them, but being much more proactive to the industry and much more stronger in our views in terms of how powerful this medium is, because it is extraordinarily powerful.
Cathy, let me come to you on that same point, and let's start on the question of revenue. For you, if you're going to grow your revenue, is that going to come at the expense of your radio competitors or from somewhere else outside of radio?
Well, I think where you start, I think if you're, to Ciaran's point, if you're about audience size and then effectively you're probably just going to be taking share off your competitor, and that's probably where our growth has come from, as would yours have, Ciaran, in the last 12 months. But there is a bigger issue, and I think there's a point at which if you're only talking about how big your audience is in a world where agencies and clients are thinking more specifically about targeting audiences, and we have to talk more about the consumer journey with radio, where it fits into the process, and that requires a different level of sophistication in your sales force, and it requires an industry that's united in understanding that just knocking each other's heads together because we're bigger or we went up 2% and you went down 3% is really not what is going to grow the pie. So I'm quite comforted Ciaran is the new chair of the CRA marketing committee. We all have senior representatives on that committee, and at board level there's a real appetite to invest in the right sort of insights. The measurement step was a big part as well. But I think you'll see radio start a new conversation with the industry in certainly in the next 12 months and beyond. I think for us, beyond that, the relevance point again, we can be frustrated that our audiences are growing, but unless the industry values the connection that we have with the consumer and we can actually educate and show value for that, then just being big doesn't necessarily get you into the conversation anymore.
I look at the ratings, they come in every few weeks, and you can't always join the dotted line between what the share of audience is and where the revenue seems to go, and that seems particularly true for people on AM. Why is that, do you think?
In terms of the industry, I'll touch on Cathy's point first. I think, we've got a real proactive duty to do for radio, and that is to say that we take about 19% of consumer time, but as an industry about 8% of revenue, and I think that the work that Ciaran's doing will be instrumental in how we approach that. Also, the GfK, the change from a great partnership with Nielsen for 66 years, doesn't come about lightly, and part of my role on the CRA board is to ensure that we finish that contract very well and start a brand new agreement with GfK very well. So I think the measurement system also has a role to play here. Beyond that, in terms of our share of revenue, I'd like to look at it as all media, because I think fundamentally, again, to reinforce Ciaran's point, you've got to look at the audience and what the client wants to do. So as part of Fairfax Media or any of our companies, you approach that from a client solution basis. and apply radio accordingly. So I think that we're actually doing okay. You know, it's I think we can do even better. So I'm more excited about how we approach that as an industry holistically, and then also applying that solution on a client basis rather than a demographic audience in a particular field of media.
So Russell, Adam's happy he's got enough revenue. Would you like any more?
Serious?
Interesting reinterpretation of my words.
Adam's
I may have put that question slightly provocative.
Adam's mostly happy because he's hoping that a new survey thing is going to change the old survey. I can tell you for sure we voted on.
We'll come to that in a minute.
We voted to keep the old guys. I'm pretty happy with where we've been on surveys. On the revenue ratings number, this is probably the biggest single. It's not a challenge, but some opportunity, I think, for us. And it's really very simple, in my view. We do not get the correlation between our audience, measured any way you want, and most of the FMs is we're down a lot. The main reason for that, without any question, is we have, with both of our radio stations, 2GB, which is not dissimilar, I don't think, to 2UE in terms of demographics, and 2CH in our case, which is even older again. They're old. They're 40 plus at best. They're probably 50 plus. And most of the people, a lot of them sitting here, I'm sure, who are sitting in a media planning or buying role, a lot of advertisers, are not that old. They're not 40. Some of them aren't 30. They've never heard, they might have heard of Alan Jones. They've certainly never listened to him. They don't listen to News Talk Radio. They probably haven't read a newspaper, an old-fashioned newspaper. They do it online. They listen to FM radio. It's very, very difficult, even though they've read Harold, they've read all the stuff we keep putting out about the importance of the older generation, how they've got all the money, and it's true, and they're going to live for another 20, 30 years and spend the money. They're not going to leave their kids as Zach when they die, and that's going to be a fair while. They know all that. But when it actually comes to putting a cross on a media plan, on an AM station, which they've got no connection with whatsoever, it's tough. And it just does not correlate. Now, the biggest job we've got to do, at Macquarie Radio at least, is to somehow, we all know the facts, but we've got to convert that into some action and getting across on a media plan. That's the reason. It's a completely, the people that are buying a lot of the media do not listen to the radio stations, and they don't listen to that kind of radio.
Now, the other side of the coin, Ciaran and Cathy, is probably your average media planner is probably more likely to listen to your sort of stations. Do you think that does give you an advantage?
Can I just jump in there
sure.
for a sec? Because I agree with Russell in terms of the over 40, but you take our classic hits network. It's a very strong number one, number two in whatever the market. We face the same challenge. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a talk versus music thing. It's a demographic thing.
Yeah.
But and it is incumbent upon us as operators to try and educate them. And if we can't educate them, then we've got to get closer to the clients themselves, and we've got to develop the relationship there. Because it is an extremely valuable audience, and radio networks all over the world cannot seem to monetize the over 40 audience. So from our perspective, it's not a talk versus music thing, it's actually an age demographic thing.
Cathy?
I think it's also, in the case of our company and the other FM operators, you have two stations. So generally you're selling a ratings footprint. So our strategy has always been to develop brands that are distinct and don't cannibalise each other, and therefore drag a broader audience that one station might struggle to attract in isolation. So in radio, it seems to be, although I know there is a sort of fascination with youth and youthful brands, the majority of the radio money is spent 25 to 54. So a standalone station, 40 to 54 may struggle, but a 25-54 combined offering is, really where most of the business is done, and that's the footprint that I think we're all trying to build.